요즘 몇몇 대기업에서 희망퇴직을 받는다는 소문이 돌기 시작하면서 미래를 걱정하는 직장인들이 굉장히 많아졌습니다. 근데 벌써 15년 전에 학교에서 선생님이 시키는 대로 말을 잘 듣고 시험을 잘 봐서 좋은 대학에 가고 상사가 시키는 대로 뛰어난 효율을 낼 사람이 앞으로는 설 자리가 없게 될 거라는 예언을 한 책이 있었습니다. 이 책의 작가는 퍼미션 마케팅이나 퍼플 카우 같은 마케팅 저서로 더 유명한 세스고딘이라고 하는 미국에서 가장 유명한 마케팅 구루 중에 한 명이었어요. 이 사람은 점점 세계가 글로벌리 연결이 되고 컴퓨터의 성능이 좋아지면서 이 효율의 차이는 정말 미미한 차이가 돼서 기계의 톱니바퀴 같은 사람은 더 이상 삶을 보장받기 어려운 시대가 올 것이라고 벌써 15년 전에 예견을 했습니다. 대신 이 톱니바퀴와 톱니바퀴를 하나로 묶어서 부품을 형성하게 해주는 그 연결고리, 이 린치핀이라고 기계공학에서 부르는 부품 같은 역할을 하는 사람만 새로운 경제 안에서 먹고 살 입지를 만들 수 있을 것이라고 얘기했어요. 그래서 이 책의 제목을 린치핀이라고 불렀고 15년 전에 이미 이 책은 한국과 미국 등의 나라에서 엄청난 베스트셀러가 되었었죠. 근데 지금은 AI의 부상과 함께 이미 미국에서 고연봉을 받고 공부 잘하는 사람들이 하던 고급 직업들이 없어지고 있다라는 이야기가 뉴스를 통해서 들려오고 있고요. 또 우리나라도 경기가 악화되자 대기업부터 벌써 정리해고 또는 희망퇴직 얘기가 돌기 시작하는데 대부분의 한국 사람들은 정말 어렸을 때부터 이런 직업을 얻기 위해서 평생 고군분투한 사람들이고요. 그 고군분투한 대가를 누리지도 못하고 벌써 내 미래가 불안정해지는 시기를 맞으면서 어떻게 하면은 기계의 톱니바퀴가 아니고 린치핀이 될 수 있는지에 대한 책이 굉장히 중요한 시기라고 생각했습니다. 세스고딘 자신 그리고 세스고딘의 책을 한국으로 가져온 출판사도 비슷한 생각이었는데 15년 만에 린치핀의 개정판을 우리나라에서 재출간하기로 결정을 했다고 하고요. 그 틈을 타서 제가 세스고딘과의 인터뷰를 성사시켰습니다.
Your Korean publisher is re-editing your book 린치핀 that you wrote maybe 15 years ago, was it?
Probably about that, yeah.
So I reread that book and it was like an apocalyptic prophecy. Like a lot of things that you prophesied in that book is coming true now. In Korea, this is especially painful because nowhere else in the world than South Korea, I believe, those beliefs that you have to work really hard to get into top college and then you have to sacrifice everything to get into Samsung or get into Hyundai and then your life will be good. Nowhere was that belief stronger than here in South Korea. And now that system is unraveling and a lot of people are in pain. So I was wondering how 15 years ago you already felt that this was going to happen?
I think it's helpful to do just a tiny bit of history about the miracle of South Korea. In 1960, the year I was born, South Korea was the second poorest country in the world. And now it's one of the richest countries in the world. That has never happened before. It was an extraordinary 60-year run. And it was based on a couple principles. But a key one is the culture and grit of the people in South Korea that said, we will iterate and industrialize and comply better and harder than anybody ever has before. And so you didn't invent the car, you didn't invent the refrigerator, you didn't invent the computer chip. That's great, no problem. You made each one of those things dramatically better. I own 2 Korean cars, and there are countless ways that the productivity of South Korea has changed the world. But productivity is a measure of effort, time, and output. And the problem that we have is that there are machines, including AI, that can do things even faster than people. So when I wrote the book, it seemed pretty obvious to me that this is what was going to happen. What we see in the US is a company like Ford can lay off 10,000 people in one day. Not because those people aren't working hard, but because the folks who designed a car no one wanted to buy. So where was the value being added, or in this case, not being added? It wasn't the fault of the people who were complying with instructions. It was the fault of the people whose job it was to invent the future. And that's just a few people, but they didn't do their job because Ford underinvested in people like that. So we're seeing more and more that you can build an organization of 5 people or 10 people that has way more impact than a corporation of 5,000 people if you get the right people doing the right kind of work. So as innovation cycles and spirals, people who don't want to innovate, they can, but they don't want to because they've been indoctrinated not to. those people are going to suffer. In a fast-moving world based on innovation, creativity, and audience development, it doesn't really matter where you came from. It doesn't really matter what you look like. We now have a shortage of enrollment, a shortage of people who are eager to be independent and lead. It's not that you need a special talent to do this. You simply need to develop the skill to do this. So in times of change, opportunities show up. The only reason that the Korean miracle happened is because the whole world was changing based on technology. If the world had been staying the same in 1960, there wouldn't have been any room for Korea to grow. Whatever you do for a living, the world is changing. And if you are leaning into it, if you're saying AI works for me as opposed to I work for AI, that's chance of a lifetime.
기본적으로 20세기 내내 전 세계적으로 대기업이 많아진 이유 중에 하나가 한 사람 한 사람이 특별한 창의성과 재능이 없더라도 그 사람들을 마치 기계 부품처럼 시스템 안에 끼워 넣으면은 가치가 창출되도록 일종의 공장화를 시켜놨기 때문에 이 기업들이 클 수 있었다고 얘기를 해요. 이런 공장화가 될수록 개개인이 기업과 협상할 수 있는 능력은 떨어지게 될 수밖에 없다고 얘기를 합니다. 임금 올려주세요. 아니면 난 더 좋은 업무 환경을 원해요. 아니면은 내 아이디어를 좀 더 존중받기를 원해요. 그럼 너 나가. 저 사람 쓰면 돼. 매뉴얼 줘. A, B, C, D 할 줄 알아? 오케이. 이렇게 매뉴얼을 따를 줄 아는 사람을 쉽게 쓸 수 있었던 이유는 우리의 교육 시스템 전체가 사실은 이미 선생님이 정해놓은 답을 돌출하는 위주로 교육을 시켰기 때문에 기본적으로 이 공교육 과정을 거쳐온 모든 사람들은 회사 입장에서는 똑같은 공산품이었다는 거예요. 공산품은 가격 경쟁이 붙고 높은 가격을 책정하기가 어렵죠. 그만큼 우리가 매뉴얼을 잘 따른다는 걸 가지고 회사와 협상을 하려고 그러면 질 수밖에 없고, 그래서 20세기 후반에 교육을 받은 사람의 숫자가 많아질수록 고등교육을 받은 사람의 삶의 질이 떨어졌다라는 얘기를 합니다. 근데 자발적으로 남이 안 한 질문을 하고 사람들을 모으고 주도할 줄 아는 사람은 오히려 모자르게 됐대요.
So one of the things that South Koreans are indoctrinated is that going to college is like really important. And then where you went to school determines your social caste, like basically until you die. So having grown up in a society like that, one of the most shocking parts of your book, 린치핀, was where you say, whether you are tightening bolts on an assembly line or in a large law firm, you are in fact factory worker all the same. Could you explain what you meant by factory work?
Factory work means you have a boss who has given you instructions and you are measured on your output. That is what happens for most people who have a job where the boss tells them what to do. So it's inevitable, given the ratchet of capitalism, that in a competitive industry, the people who will suffer are the people who are accepting instructions, because I can just find somebody else to follow the steps. So if I think about how most lawyers spend most of their day, it's not doing essentially human creative work. It is repeating something that they were good at yesterday. And I used to live in the law school dorm, and my wife was a lawyer for 20 years. So I know a lot of lawyers. Lawyers went to law school for that reason. They're good at school. And the thing about school in the United States and in Korea is they never, ever ask you a question they don't know the answer to. Think about that for a second. So for 12 or 16 or 20 years, we spend all of our days working on questions where someone knows the answer. And then we get a job hoping that someone will ask us a question that no one knows the answer to. That's unlikely, right? That you have to begin by practicing answering questions that haven't been answered yet. If you are doing that, then you become the boss, not the person who is following instructions in the factory.
세스고딘은 예술가처럼 일해야 된다라고 얘기를 합니다. 예술가들은 누가 프로젝트를 주기를 기다리는 게 아니라 자기가 계속 영감을 찾아서 스스로 프로젝트를 만들고, 시장이 있기 때문에 프로젝트를 만드는 게 아니라 자기가 원하기 때문에 프로젝트를 만든 다음에 원하는 사람을 나중에 찾아가지고 커뮤니티를 구성하죠. 그렇기 때문에 일을 먼저 하고 시장을 나중에 찾고, 누가 시키지 않아도 자기의 영감과 열정을 가지고 일할 수 있는 사람들은 너무 세상에서 그 숫자가 적기 때문에 이런 사람들 위주로 사람이 모이게 되고, 그런 사람들은 사람과 사람을 연결해서 새로운 시스템을 만들 수 있는 핵심 부품, 즉 린치핀이 될 수 있다고 얘기합니다.
And you describe the people who can lean into the future as the artist in your book. And you had to explain it many times in your book because you foresaw that a lot of people would get confused, right? So when in general conversation you talk about artists, you generally think about somebody who paints something on a canvas or sculpts something from a material, or somebody who's making music or who's a movie director. But in fact, you say that if you're a waiter, you can be an artist. If you're a real estate salesman, you can be an artist. And that's a very counterintuitive thing for most people to understand.
My friend Will Guidara tells the story about this. There's a fancy restaurant in New York City. He used to be the head of it. And the waiter overhears a couple out for their anniversary talking while they're eating this luxurious dinner about their anniversary and about how 40 years ago in New York City, when they had first started dating, they had had a hot dog from this cart outside on the corner. The waiter heard that. Now, if the waiter was just, quote, doing their job, they would just keep being the waiter. But instead, they ran back to the kitchen, and the kitchen somehow managed to create a New York City hot dog and bring it out as the next course. Wow. And this doesn't just change the life of the people you served it to. It changes the life of the restaurant because now it's legendary. Because now that's what we do around here. Now we understand we're not in the food business, we're in the miracles business. If one waiter can do that, a second waiter can do that, 10 waiters could do that. Not to just listen for hot dog clues, but to imagine what it would be to be a human who does something that might not work.
I think a lot of people who's listening to this might say, hey, I don't get paid enough to do that.
You don't get paid enough to do brain-dead industrial work is what you don't get paid enough to do. What a curse to have to do that day after day after day. What a curse to be seen as a disposable cog. Now, you don't get paid enough to do that. Someone would have to pay me a lot of money to do that. But you have a chance, the choice, to create a miracle for somebody. I'd do that for free. I'd pay someone to let me make a miracle for them. So you've got to decide, first of all, what are you saving up your emotional labor for? Right? It seems to me that emotional labor replaces itself. If you don't use it, it disappears. If you use it a lot, you get more of it. And second, maybe if you create enough value for your boss will realize they can't live without you. And they will then give you bigger miracles to do.
I mean, I've never really worked in a corporate job. And that's probably why your book was so immediately helpful to me in trying to build my career. But a lot of people who has been going from job to job and who's more used to this system, they might have some questions about this book. And one of which is, you don't need to write a resume. One of my best friends who do a lot of YouTube episodes with me does a lot of career advice type of YouTube. And one thing he said, in this unstable economy that we have today, you should always have your LinkedIn page up to date and always have your resume up to date because you don't know when you're going to get the slip. But 15 years ago, you went the opposite direction and you say, hey, don't even write a resume. So if you don't have write a resume, how do people find you?
There's a funny parody video on YouTube and the guy says, see my business card? It doesn't fit in a Rolodex because it doesn't belong in a Rolodex. And for people who are younger than me, a Rolodex was the thing we used to hold business cards. If you have a resume, you are begging AI to screen you, and you are begging the recruiters to screen you. So if your resume has the top college in Seoul, the top MBA program in Korea, and a big famous company where you had a good title, I think you should have a resume. But for everybody else, I want to see your projects. I want to see who would miss you if you're gone. Show me the list of where you've made a difference. Because if you keep making a difference, people are going to call you. And you're not going to leave when you get the pink slip. You're going to leave when you're ready. So the work is to show up and show up and show up and build a life of projects. And you can do that while having a job at a big company. But what are those projects? Are you the person that led the innovation at LG that did X, Y, and Z and then wrote a paper about it? Because if you do that, your phone is going to ring. And so instead of relying on fitting in all the way, think about what would it mean to stand out all the way.
The way you describe working like an artist might sound to some people like you need to be rich to do it. So you write a lot about giving gift. And I understand that it's not a physical gift. It's emotional gift. It's artistic gift. It's your creativity. It's your vibe. But you said that you have to have a vision. You have to do the work. And you have to give gift to people without expecting to be repaid immediately. You know, when I started my career, writing books and being a commentator on television. I used that approach, but it was because I was living in a studio apartment by myself. I had virtually no expense. I wasn't married. I had no kids. So I could say, okay, I'm going to dedicate my next 5 years to creating good books and creating good content and see where it goes. But somebody who's trying to make a switch from being part of the mold into being a linchpin, but he's already bogged down by credit card debt, mortgage, 2 kids in college. That person might say, hey, I don't have time to dedicate myself to creating something meaningful and giving gift. I need the paycheck now.
Yeah, you're trapped by the system. The system wants you to be trapped, and it has succeeded in trapping you. So let's just get our terms straight. Being generous and giving gifts doesn't cost money. It costs emotion, as you just said. That what we are talking about is not giving away your work for free. It's offering dignity and connection and respect in ways that are challenging, and then not doing a quick hustle of I'll do this, and I'll get that, but the longer arc of reciprocity that comes from contribution. So with that said, I would say 2 things. First of all, every single person who's reading this or listening to this is already rich. We have more resources than the last king of France did. It's all relative. So I've done a lot of work with Acumen, a nonprofit, and I was in India, and I drove 8 hours from Delhi to Bareilly, and then 2 more hours to a village that had no electricity. And in a village like that, people make $3 to $5 a day. I think by our standards, no one would say that the people in that village are rich. But I will tell you 2 things that I discovered on that day. The first one is there's one person in that village who makes a fine living simply by being the person who keeps the village connected, simply by being the person who asks, who offers, who organizes, who is the sort of honorary mayor, because they decided to be. And the second thing that happened was, as we were leaving, our van got stuck in the mud. Now, you can't just pick up the phone and call a tow truck, because that doesn't exist. And I'm starting to freak out, and 4 minutes later, a giant backhoe comes around the curb, and this guy pulls our truck out of the mud. And he refused any tip or gratuity of any kind. He just said, no, that's why we keep the backhoe around, because it's for people in the village to help. So it's so easy to think, oh, I gotta just do my job and then go watch some K-pop and then go watch some Netflix and then I'm exhausted and I'm gonna go to bed. I'm not suggesting in this book you should quit your job. What I'm suggesting in this book is you probably have 20 to 40 hours a week where you are not at work. And there are members of your community that need you. There are things you can organize. There are projects you can build. If you build them thinking you can get paid $8 an hour doing it, you're going to make $8 an hour. But if you build it creating lots of value for whatever local community you seek to serve, it will come back to you. So mostly the book is about shifting your perspective and telling yourself a different story. It's not a step-by-step guide that promises that you're going to be independent in 6 weeks. You won't. But it's about realizing you don't get tomorrow over again. So don't waste it just doing what your boss says. Figure out where are the spots where you can create this other kind of value.
이 책에서 굉장히 핵심적인 내용 중에 하나가 데이먼, 부대 그리스어로 천재, 창의성 이런 걸 얘기한대요. 그 resistance, 즉 저항이라는 2개의 심리가 우리 안에서 싸우고 있다고 얘기를 합니다. 피카소도 이런 얘기를 했다고 그러죠. 우리는 태어날 때 모두 예술가다. 관건은 어른이 돼서도 어떻게 예술가로 남는지다 라는 얘기를 했다고 하는데, 그런 만큼 우리 안에 누구나 창의적으로 나만의 프로젝트를 만들고 내 비전대로 세상을 바꾸고 싶어하고 사람들을 모으고 싶어하는 욕망이 있다고 합니다. 근데 또 우리 사회는 너가 그렇게 하면은 우리는 너를 왕따시킬 거야. 너가 나서지 말고 말만 잘 들으면은 우리가 너가 기본적인 생계는 유지할 수 있게 도와줄게 라는 교육을 시켜놨기 때문에 내가 나서서 린치핀이 되려고 하더라도 아닌가? 가만히 있어야 되나? 라고 하는 심리가 있는데, 이거를 resistance, 저항이라는 이름으로 세스고딘은 불러요. 그래서 어떻게 하면은 resistance를 이기고 데이몬을 더 밖으로 빼낼 수 있는지가 이 린치핀이 될 수 있냐 없냐의 가장 핵심적 관건이라고 얘기를 해요.
One part of your book that helped me a lot was when you talk about the daemon and the resistance. It was particularly helpful for me because, you know, I do a work where I'm exposed to a lot of criticism, and there are days when I read too many negative comments and I say, hey, to hell with it, I want to give up. Now, reading your book, you helped me put a name to it. That's the resistance. And it really helps me make another video with focusing on people who will appreciate it. So thank you for that. But I think in East Asia, we probably have a stronger resistance built in as a culture than maybe somebody from the US, because we were taught from a very young age to avoid doing something that might raise an eyebrow. Modesty is a very important thing. So even if you know something, you're not really supposed to show off. You're not supposed to say, I know better than you. So bringing a new idea to table to a lot of Asian people, especially if you're a junior in an organization, it seems like it's too presumptuous to do. But I understand that in the US as well, there are people who are naturally like soft-mannered, soft-spoken, who are more introverted. How do they get over the resistance and let their demons shine? Because if they pretend like they're charismatic or outspoken, it's just going to backfire.
Well, I have two suggestions, because I'm not saying you need to be sparkly and charismatic and in people's faces. The first tactical suggestion is simple. If you work at a big company, organize a book group that meets once a week over lunch. And you don't have to speak ever. You're just giving other people a chance to speak. If you are the organizer and the coordinator, bringing together 5 or 6 people who grow, people go where they grow. They stick around. They will see you as the person who created the conditions for that to happen. You can do that tomorrow. It's free. You're going to have lunch anyway. If someone doesn't want to come, they won't come. If they do want to come, they'll be glad they came. So that's one tactic. And the other one is writing still works. And I don't care how shy you are, you can write. And if you want to write under a pseudonym, write under a pseudonym. But if you put your ideas into the world and they resonate with people, don't do it in short form nonsense like Twitter. Do it in a place where you can have the room to build a narrative, to talk about things that are important, right? I don't think hydrogen is going to be a useful way to power cars. But if you work at a company that's working on that, and you write a series of white papers that persuades the government that hydrogen needs more investment, you're going to be doing fine, right? And so between the organizing and the writing, there's plenty of room for people who are shy. The biggest problem we have is we talk ourselves out of it. We talk ourselves out of it because the culture has pushed you to say that to yourself. And it's not just in Korea, it's around the world. It's particularly challenging in Korea, but the culture made a deal with you. And the deal was, if you fit into the culture, we'll take care of you. And it's not honoring its deal. So what are you going to do about it?
In the beginning, when I was starting this channel, I think I was in the mode of being an artist, according to your definition. So when I was starting this channel, I said, okay, I got these great ideas. I want to put it out there, and I want to offer my ideas to like-minded people. I made 500 videos in the last 5 years, and enough people appreciated my gift that I became a YouTuber with 1.8 million subscribers. So a lot of stuff that you said actually worked for me. But I think there are points in my career where the repetition of shipping actually interferes with the art, right? There are days when I say, okay, I'm uninspired, I'm tired, my main producer just had a baby, he's not coming to work. I want to scrap it, but I force myself to ship, and I'm really unimpressed by what I do. And sometimes this goes on for a month, right? So 2 or 3 months. A lot of people start out bright-eyed in their career, and after 3, 4, 5 years, they get jaded, disillusioned, and it's no longer art anymore. It becomes factory work. So how do you fight against that tendency for something that used to be art and becomes a factory work?
No, it's a great question. So we need a different Pablo Picasso story. So Pablo Picasso was asked by a gallery owner he worked with to come in to authenticate some paintings. And Picasso painted 10,000 paintings in his career. And so there's this collector. He's thinking of buying these 8 paintings. And Picasso comes in and they say, thank you, Mr. Picasso, for coming. We would like you to look at these 8 paintings and tell us if they're real. And Picasso says, that's a fake, that's a fake, that's a fake. And the gallery owner says, what are you talking about? I watched you paint that painting. And Picasso says, yeah, but I often paint fakes. And what he meant was that to make a living, he would often reproduce a painting that didn't take any emotional labor. It was still a painting Pablo Picasso painted, the same way one of your YouTube videos is a video you made, but you didn't feel any risk around it. You didn't feel like it was generous in your best work because you knew it was going to work and it was your job. And I think the reality is, it is for jazz musicians, it is for me, it is for many people. Some days you do your job and some days you do your art. We have to create the conditions to force ourselves to do the art instead of lulling ourselves into simply doing the work again and again and again. Because then we're doing nothing but making fakes. What we have to do, and this is one of the reasons I write books, is we have to create discomfort for ourselves, or else we lull into just doing our job. So in the case of someone like you, maybe what you say is once a month there's going to be an animated video from me. And I don't know anything about how to do a good job on that. So I'm now on the hook to go do that. Or maybe it's nothing to do with video. Maybe once a month you run a live event at the Children's Hospital. You got to put it on the calendar. And if you put it on the calendar, you do it, and then you'll discover your videos get better when you go back to do your job.
오늘은 마케팅 구루 세스고딘과 함께 이야기를 나누면서 내가 버림받는 사람이 아니라 사람들이 더 찾게 되는 사람이 되는 방법에 대해서 이야기를 해봤어요. 이 책을 처음에 읽으면 약간 철학서 같기도 하고 인문서 같기도 하고 도대체 뭔 얘기를 하려고 그러나 초반에 한 반 정도는 혼돈이 되는 책입니다. 근데 나중에 되면은 사실 이것이 굉장히 마케팅적인 관점에 기반해서 살아남는 지도를 그려준 책이라는 것을 깨닫게 되는 것 같아요. 마케팅의 기본 원리도 마찬가지죠. 남과 구분이 안 되는 차별화가 없는 물건을 팔게 되면 결국 가격으로 경쟁을 해야 됩니다. 가격으로 경쟁을 하다 보면 점점 마진이 낮아지거나 심지어는 적자에 팔 수도 있게 되고, 그럼 결국 물량으로 승부하는 수밖에 없어요. 엄청나게 힘든 일이죠. 하지만 특별한 브랜드, 특별한 비전을 가지고 있는 상품들은 다른 상품들 10배, 20배 가격을 매겨도 불티난 듯이 팔려나가고 사람들이 줄을 서서 사기도 해요. 그런 만큼 우리가 쉽게 대체 가능한 사람이 되면 공산품처럼 나의 몸값을 계속 낮추고 나 자신을 물량으로 혹사시키는 방법으로 먹고 살아야 하지만, 남들이 나를 찾게 되는 독보적인 존재가 되었을 때 기술이 어떻게 바뀌던 나는 먹고 살 수 있다라는 굉장히 중요한 얘기를 하고 있다고 생각을 합니다. 결국 힘이라는 것은 필요에 의해서 결정이 되는 것 같아요. 내가 남이 더 많이 필요하면, 그게 회사가 됐던 투자자가 됐던 그 권한은 남에게 있는 것이고, 남이 나를 더 필요로 하면 그 권력은 나한테 있는 것이다 라는 마케팅의 기본 원칙을 이 인생을 살아가는 지침으로 굉장히 잘 풀어낸 책이라고 생각해서 오늘 소개해봤습니다. 제가 해외 작가 인터뷰를 할 때는 대체로 45분 정도 인터뷰를 합니다. 근데 올리는 영상은 제가 한국말로 설명하는 부분과 작가분이 설명하는 부분을 교차 편집해서 한 25분에서 30분 정도 영상을 올리다 보니까 실제 작가님이 이야기하는 분량이 한 15분 정도 되는 경우가 많아요. 이걸 풀로 보고 싶은 분들을 위해서 저희가 멤버십 VIP 에리아에다가 이 세스고딘 인터뷰 풀 영상을 올려놨고요. 이 풀 영상에는 AI 시대의 린치핀은 어떤 사람이 될 거라고 생각하는지, 또는 자기 업무에서 예술적으로 직업을 해석한다는 게 어떤 의미인지에 대해서 상세한 내용이 들어있는 인터뷰이기 때문에 관심 있는 분들은 멤버십 가입하셔서 풀 영상으로 보시면 될 것 같습니다. 오늘은 마케팅 구루 세스고딘이 제안하는 경쟁이 치열한 사회에서 살아남는 법에 대한 이야기를 해봤고요. 다음 시간에는 더 재밌는 문화 역사 이야기로 찾아뵙겠습니다. 안녕히 계십시오.
Could you say a word for Korean readers that are eagerly awaiting for the introduction of your re-edition?
What do we need books for at all? The reason we need a book is that you can pick up a book and you can hand it to your friend and say, let's read this together. You can walk into the office and hand out 4 copies. It causes conversations to happen. It is very unlikely that you will become a linchpin all by yourself. It is very likely that if you find 2 or 3 people and you talk about it, that your life will change.